What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the quarantine zone again. And this time we are here with Toby Driver of Kayo. Thank you so much for being here today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Alex. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here. Thank you for giving us some new music to, wait out the rest of these uncertain times with. We got Moss Screw on the Swords and Plowshares Alike. Did you consider this just sort of like a direct continuation of what we heard off of Blasphemy? Is it almost kind of picking up where you left off after that? Or is this like almost a dawning of a new age for Kayo, as I like to say?
Mm. I would say it's maybe a little bit of both. Um, throughout my kind of growth processes as a musician, there's always threads tying the previous thing to the current thing,
Mm-hmm.
or the current thing to the next thing, just because of the way that I develop. I'm not going to really develop in steps so much as in this kind of gradual gradient. So,
Mm-hmm.
you'll always see some crossover, but the lineup is different, and thematically it's different. The sound is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think maybe if Blasphemy was produced in more of a metal way, then then I think that Blasphemy and Moss Grew would be even more similar. But just since Blasphemy's production is so not metal,
Mm-hmm.
then it kind of like sets that music apart and puts it into something else.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that maybe the first three singles that you released off this album, Void and Virgo, Get Out of the Tower, and The Necklace, almost serve as a good representation of what the entirety of Moss Screw is going to sound like, or is there a lot more to be discovered on it?
Yeah, there's some faster material that which hasn't really come out yet. Um, so yeah, I would say it's aesthetically representative, but there's still some things to be discovered, of course.
Hmm. Well, I've always said that like maybe Dot's music, and I know some artists are kind of skeptical on this term, but I've always said that your music is fairly experimental. I think that there's metal aspects, there's rock aspects, there's so many different aspects of Dot that like it's fair to say that trying new things is always fairly easy, right? Or just as much part of the creative process.
I think so, and I guess I would say that if I wasn't trying new things, then I would probably get bored with myself, and I would lose my motivation to keep making records.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Mhm.
One thing I am curious about, I know this is kind of a cliche question, and I know artists really hate this question sometimes, but with the
Mhm.
moss grew on the swords and plowshares alike, this is like, I feel like it's a metaphor, but it's also a statement. It could be many different things. I'm really am wondering what the sort of intention was behind this sort of title that you're expressing. Is this
Mm.
sort of like a message or a metaphor or something fairly
Mm.
personal? How did this title sort of make it on the album?
Well, I have to start off by saying that I'm not the person in the band that writes the lyrics or the titles.
Hmm.
So I can give you my perspective.
Yeah,
But our lyricist is named Jason Byron, and he comes up with all this stuff. And of course, I discussed it with him, but
yeah,
but he's really the poet.
yeah, of course.
So yeah, so this title is a reference to a biblical passage that says, "Turn turn your swords into plowshares," and basically saying, go from being a warlike people into a peaceful people. And by saying moss grew on both the swords and the plowshares means that in either case, whether you are warlike people or whether you're peaceful people, the end point is the same. Nature takes over, and in a way, that's I've been thinking about it a lot, and people have been asking me this question when I've been doing interviews. I'm trying to kind of say an explanation for it, and it's kind of like, well, it kind of sounds nihilist in a way, almost like you know that there's no reason to believe anything, and there's no reason to kind of have a moral code if nature's just going to take over and neutralize everything at the end. And that's not really what I think, and that's not really what Jason Byron, our lyricist, thinks either. So I think it's more about futility, and um, there are some images on the album that are about this kind of like hero or knight kind of figure, um, trying to achieve some kind of heroic aim,
Hmm.
and then he fails, and then he just turns into dust. And just thinking about how we're a dark band, and we always have like this dark imagery and things like that. This whole idea of the hero like not being able to achieve what he wants is really depressing, and I think it relates a lot to how I feel a lot about just my path in my life too. And I feel like especially with like music and everything like that, I feel like things don't really ever go the way that I want them to. And
Yeah. Well,
so it's always funny to just like think of how I'm going to interpret Jason Byron's lyrics and make them be kind of about my own situation so that I can sing them with emotion and things like that.
well, you did explain this better. I've asked vocalists like what the meaning of certain things are, and you've explained it better than a lot of vocalists I've previously interviewed when asking them. So,
Oh, well.
excellent job. Did
Well, thank you.
but was this title or this idea maybe laid down before you even put pen to paper on songwriting? Did maybe this meaning almost influence the music itself in a way, or did like you have the full album written before lyrics and a title sort of came to be?
No, Byron and I worked side by side on this one. I would work on some demos, send him what I was working on. He'd send me lyrics, and then I would kind of, edit what I was doing based on what he was doing, and then he would edit what he was doing based on what I was doing. So it was really a parallel process this time. In Kayo, we have done it different ways. Tried it doing music first, then lyrics, or lyrics first, then music. But in this case, it was parallel. But I did tell him that I wanted it to be more of like kind of like an emotional experience. You asked me in the last question about whether there was a message, and I guess I want to say that Kayo, we don't really have a message, and it's really, our music is really about just expressing how we feel more. We're not trying to really send a message. It's just expressing our emotions, and I guess in musical and lyrical form. And since the last Kayo album was a concept album and a story, I just told him to make sure that we didn't really do that this time. And I didn't really want to have a narrative element, and I didn't really want people to start thinking that we were like a concept album band.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting how you can do one record, and if that's the only thing that people know you as, they think of you as that thing. But Kayo has 11 records, and we only have 2 concept albums. So we're not really that. I mean, I like prog, and I like King Diamond's stories and stuff like that. And so we like to touch on that sometimes, but we're not really a concept album sort of band.
I think it takes a lot of guts and a lot of exploration really in order to experiment with both. I mean, there are some bands like you mentioned, King Diamond, Mastodon's another great example where like they're a very concept driven band. But I've always said that like Kayo is an experience that is very left open to interpretation. And I know that the last album was more concept driven, but I think that really I think it's an experience, and in the end every listener's experience is going to be different.
Yeah, and I think it really is very much open to interpretation, because I've seen that we have audiences that are very, very different from each other. Like we have some audience that would be like so far on this side of the spectrum, and then people on so far on this side, and people that would never get along in real life, I think, are all come to our music. So I think people definitely interpret it in different ways.
Definitely. And you kind of in a way just answered this, but like, do you always start the songwriting process off with maybe like a preconceived idea of let's make it sound like this, or do you like to improvise and kind of like roll the dice a couple times?
I always start off with a very, very clear idea of what I want the sound to generally be like on the record. And I wouldn't say that I always necessarily start off with a kind of lyrical direction, because I just leave that up to Byron, because that's his field and he's really genius at it. So just musically speaking, as a composer that likes to keep myself interested by trying new things, every time I'm about to write an album, I'm like, okay, what do I kind of want to use for instrumentation, and what are the artists that are influencing me at this time, and how do I fit into the scene at this time, and what kind of shows do I want to be playing, and all sorts of things like that really serve to tell me like how to shape the music.
Now, one question I wanted to ask you as sort of like a fan of your work is that this year is 20 years of Leaving Your Body Map from Maudlin and the Well, and I just kind of wanted to turn back the clock a little bit. We talked about the future of Kayo. I kind of wanted to turn back the clock and kind of what was going back to 2001. What was the sort of mind frame with Leaving Your Body Map? Because I never would have thought. Granted, I was in first grade when Leaving Your Body Map came out, so I didn't discover it till later. But part of me is wondering, did maybe anything you've done with Maudlin of the Well maybe influence what you would later do with Kayo?
Yeah, and I think specifically with this album, Moss Grew and the Swords and Plowshares Alike, just because it's the anniversary, um, that that very fact that it's the anniversary shaped what is happening on this record. And to be specific, it's the same lineup that was on the very first Maudlin of the Well demo, and it was recorded in the same location, my hometown, and then the music is taking its influence from the exact same places that the very first Maudlin of the Well music took its influences from, which is basically what I was listening to in high school, which is kind of like 90s Gothic doom metal from Europe mixed with new age music. And um, I guess like Kayo hasn't really explored that aesthetic at all in our entire discography. Maybe a little bit on Hubardo, but not really so much. Not really the way that it was back in the Maudlin days. And you know, I was thinking about these Maudlin of the Well records that we finished in the year 2000 and came out in 2001, um, and about how that's the last time I kind of explored that aesthetic. And I was writing that music as a 20-year-old, and I would have liked to take the opportunity now to revisit that aesthetic, but write it with the level of sophistication that I've gained from just being a composer for 25 years now.
Is it?
So it's sorry, yeah, I was just going to say it's basically approaching that aesthetic again, but from a more mature and more sophisticated point of view.
Is like a project almost kind of like a different mind frame, like between Maudlin of the Well and Kayo and being involved as producing and songwriting and all this? Is it almost a different mindset depending on the project, or is there a method behind the madness of all your creativity that applies to everything?
Well, Model of the Wells method was specifically oriented around like this kind of like astral projection and lucid dream exploration, and how to kind of compose music, getting in touch with that realm in a way, and kind of making this astral metal, we called it, as a almost like a form of like meditation music, but metal. And also, of course, I wrote that music when I was 20 and earlier. And so if you ask, my methods are, is there a separation between the project? Well, I don't have the mind of a 20-year-old anymore, and I haven't actually written Maudlin of the Well music since then.
Yeah.
So if I was going to make another actual Maudlin of the Well record, I talked about it with those guys because we intended to do a Maudlin of the Well reunion record this year, but we couldn't because of the pandemic, and that's why we did the KO record this way. But if we had done a real Maudlin of the Well record, we would have to really do some kind of deep systemic work internally in order to touch that feeling again, because the feeling of Maudlin of the Well music was a lot about discovery and about not knowing things. And I think the music came out that way is because we just, we're immature and naive, and we're like, we don't really know much, but we're interested in a lot of things, so let's just try a lot of things. And so there's this sense of playfulness and discovery that I don't really think that you can get when you're older, and you're just so experienced that it's hard to kind of get that sense of discovery, because you don't really know where to look for new things sometimes.
Yeah,
I'm trying to say.
And from what you were telling me, like having like this sort of biblical reference in the new KO album, and like you mentioned like you were taking inspiration from like '90s Gothic bands for modeling, like My Dying Bride or Paradise Lost,
right.
Catatonia,
Mm-hmm.
and like and kind of like it's fair to say you're able to take inspiration from both internal and external sources, right? It's not like you have one element that or one pun intended, that like you kind of dive into for inspiration, right?
Yeah, and thinking about the Maudlin of the Well music again, I think that a lot of that music came out of having the time to, I guess I want to say meditate, but something a little bit more complex than meditation, which just trying to do these kind of new age explorations of astral projection, lucid dreaming takes a lot of time, and a lot of quiet time where you are, sleeping deliberately and journaling and just all sorts of stuff like that. That as an older person, you don't necessarily have the luxury to spend that kind of time on doing that. So yeah, to shortly answer your question again, we would really have to somehow get our mind into a different place than it is in right now in order for it to really be Maudlin of the Well music.
Yeah. Now, circling back to Kayo next year, because there's a lot of Kayo to celebrate around this time, because next year is going to be the 10-year anniversary of Gamma Knife, and I was just wondering, kind of going back, turning back the clock a little bit more forward from Maudlin, but still back from this, what the mindset was kind of going into Gamma Knife, and maybe if that would like determine from what we would hear in later albums such as Plastic House on Base of Sky or Blasphemy, etc.
Oh, I'm glad you asked about that one because no one ever does. But I really like that record. Yeah, that one. The mindset going into that one was that I remember at the time that all the black metal that was really popular at that time, that was getting a lot of praise, I thought it was being very lazily written, and it was almost like it was almost being written like. Just like a minimum amount of chords, like almost like I don't know, like punk or something. Just something where it's not like the level of sophistication in writing that you used to see in black metal with bands like Emperor, that you see now with Kralis or Deathspell Omega or something. Back then, it was there was just this period where the writing in all black metal was super bland.
Yeah,
and all these bands were getting. All these bands were getting a lot of praise for being great black metal bands, but I just felt that they were bland, and I was like, man, people are really not taking advantage of the places that this aesthetic could go. You could still have something sound like black metal, but just have the writing be a lot more interesting, and so I kind of wanted to make a record like that.
Oh, kind of like a commentary or like a response.
Yeah, exactly. And then Kayo has saxophone players, so then it ended up having saxophone on it, and then suddenly became something else. But that's cool; it's unique. So, but anyhow, and then we didn't have any money to record that record, and we didn't have a label at the time. So we basically, I had this idea to record it live, and then just considering the aesthetic of raw black metal and how a lot of the time at least in the past, people loved how it sounded pretty crappy. So I thought that it was kind of a good kind of confluence of circumstances to say, well, I want to make this commentary in black metal, and also we have to record it in a kind of shitty context. So the shitty sound will serve the music in a way. So it worked out that way. But I don't really think that it's going to show up in a 10-year anniversary context, because the year after that, it's Kayo.'s 20th anniversary. And so I think the next thing that Kayo does is going to be more like a 20th anniversary album of the whole band's history.
Okay, so maybe do a concert where you play the whole catalog in full.
Well, that would be many, many, many hours. So
I'll be there. And it's funny you mentioned black metal in 2012 too. You know that whole thing, that pop goes punk sort of those record series.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that was black metal using the pop formula. So I was even saying pop goes cult. So.
Okay. Yeah.
So
but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. But did black metal? Because I thought the last couple of years, especially in 2019 and now, there's been some pretty badass black metal bands. Has black metal redeemed itself at all?
Yeah. I think people have figured it out, and musicians were basically all probably having the same thought at the same time. We're just like, man, this stuff is so bland, and we really like the aesthetic, so we really want to do something more with it. And I just want to kind of tie this back into Moss Grew, because that's kind of what I'm doing with the kind of like Gothic doom sound. Is just kind of like, I kind of fell off listening to that genre
Thank you. Because if I have to hear the same, I cannot listen. I'm gonna get so much shit for this. I'll take the dislikes on this video like a man. I cannot listen to any classic Black Sabbath song anymore because of how much of the stoner Gothic doom of just bending the same E string and the same out of. So thank you for addressing. Maybe black metal changed because of Gamma Knife, so maybe this will change that too.
I mean, maybe people will people who never bothered to check out this genre will say, oh, there's actually some cool aesthetic to be have in this genre. But I'm actually not even really talking about the kind of stoner doom so much, because I never was really so into that. But the stuff I'm talking about is more like the Gothic doom, which is yeah, like you said, My Dying Bride and stuff. They never really did that kind of bluesy thing until maybe like one song or so. But it was focused a lot more on kind of like these minor depressing things. And anyway, in the 90s, I liked the genre. And then in the kind of, after around 2002 or so, I kind of totally fell off listening to that genre because I didn't really think there were any cool bands and anybody doing anything interesting anymore. And even the bands that existed in the 90s that were still making music, they stopped being good. And I was like, man, maybe this genre actually sucks. And maybe I was wrong in the 90s to be so into this, but I don't really think the genre sucks. I think that just people stopped writing well.
Yeah.
And I think that, the sound is really cool and the genre is cool. I think people just need to make more of an effort to write creatively.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to do in this case.
Well, yeah, of course, because there's been numerous times where like I would be, a band would show me something that they're working on, and I'd be like, oh, let me guess what your favorite band is. Is it the band you sound exactly alike? Like,
yeah.
So, I think, and with Gothic music, Lacuna Coil is my favorite band of all time, and they were able to kind of reinvent that Gothic sound. But if you want to check out a good Gothic band, they're not so much doomy; they're more like goth rock. But you should check out this new band called On to Others. They used to be called Idle Hands, but they're called On to Others. Great band.
What did you say they used to be called?
They used to be called Idle Hands.
Idle Hands. Oh, I saw Idle Hands play.
Oh, with King
Diamond? I saw them play with King Diamond.
Yeah.
They were great.
That was the best opening act I've ever seen at any concert, like ever.
Yeah.
So
they were really good.
Yeah. Their new album just came out and it's amazing. But
cool.
Yeah. And I kind of wanted to go back a little bit more to your songwriting process a little bit more. But like, do you find it? You mentioned that you wrote like this album sort of like side by side with Byron, and like, do you almost think that? Do you prefer to maybe like write when you're a little bit more alone in isolation though, because isolation is a great feel for creativity, or do you prefer to be the company of other musicians when writing music?
Oh, I really can only work in isolation. Byron doesn't live in my state, so when we collaborate, we're just collaborating over distance.
Okay. All right.
Collaborating with musicians in the same room, I love doing it, but it results in a very different kind of music. I don't think that I could make the type of music that exists in Kayo in that way.
Okay. Never say never, though.
Yeah, because it's just that it's too detail oriented. Maudlin of the Well was more collaborative in that way, and I'm in this other band Vora that's pretty collaborative in that sense. There's a band leader that has the main ideas, but in the past we've written riffs in the rehearsal room, like that kind of style. But I think Kayo is too much about architecture and details, and everything has to relate to everything else in a very specific way. So yeah, I'm not so sure that writing that way really works for this band.
Fair enough. And I saved the hardest question for last. Are you ready for the most difficult question of the whole interview?
Yeah.
All right. How do you know when a song is done?
Oh. I think that you can tell when the song is done when when anything that you add to it doesn't change it. And I think that as you're working on something, and especially if you're constructing in the studio, which is a really awesome way to work, maybe you're not sure that it's done, and then you say, okay, let me try to add this new part, or let me add more to the ending of the song, and you just keep trying to add things to it, and it's not making it any better. And that really will tell you, like, it doesn't need anything else added to it, and it has to be done.
Wow, that was a very good technical answer. I appreciate that. Very detail oriented.
Well, I'm kind of like a maximalist, so in music and in my just kind of aesthetic sense. So I always like to add as much as possible, and that's kind of like a good way for me to know.
Yeah.
Just keep adding, keep doing more, and then it hits a wall. But yeah, making minimal music, for example, like I couldn't give you an answer about that. I have no idea how to make a minimal piece of music or know when it's done.
Well, I guess we won't be getting a grindcore album from you anytime soon.
You think grindcore is minimal?
Uh,
Yeah, I guess instrumentation. Yeah, a
yeah,
lot of notes though.
yeah. Oh man, I'm gonna get a bunch of angry Napalm Death fans. But what you mentioned too, that you like write from that emotional place too, and you write
Yeah.
like from an emotional spark. So do you think that maybe like the longer you are working on something, the harder it is to kind of like maintain that emotional energy that spawned the initial idea?
Um, hmm, Good question. I have not had that problem in a long time. Um, because I guess I compartmentalize my work process. And so let's say like the composition process is one phase, and then the rehearsal and performance part is another phase, and then the actual production part is another phase. Like let's just say it's compartmentalized like that. I think that anytime you enter a new phase of it, it refreshes your relationship with it.
Hmm.
And so, let's say like if I'm working on something very, very sad and I'm writing it, and I feel sad when I'm writing it, and then it's been several months, and so suddenly like I'm used to it and I'm not sad anymore. Well, then I have to practice singing it, and then it hits me in a whole new way, and I'm reminded about it, and
Yeah.
then I'm done with that process, and then I have to go like record it and you know listen to myself singing it through a mic that's recorded really well, and hearing all the details and adding the reverb so that it sounds perfect, and listening to it over and over again. Well, that just reminds me again about it. So I think, yeah. And then the next part of the process, of course, is playing it live, which is a whole new thing. So it's always going to keep being refreshed by the different stages of it.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, maybe if you go back to something that's like several years old, then connecting with it in that way, well, it reminds you of how you felt at that time. So then again, it's new.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always new.
Well, and as a KO Dot fan, like I'd be able to tell 30 seconds of listening to a song, oh, that's off of Choirs of the Eye, or that's off of, Gamma Knife, or that's off of Blasphemy, etc. So I think in the end, like, really, when you listen to the whole album, it's just that one experience alone where, I think there is a sort of like a universal emotion or a universal armature that applies to every track.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's my memories. So if I listen to anything from an album is like a diary page.
Yeah.
So immediately you're just all of those feelings and memories from that time come back, and you're there, and you're like, oh my god.
Yeah, definitely. So before
Yeah.
we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for such a great conversation. Is there just anything else that you would like to promote for KO Dot with the release of Moss Screw? Can when this fucking virus that shall not be named is finally behind us, can you maybe bring a KO Dot show to New York City? We would love to have you here. I could just picture a great KO Dot performance at St. Vitus.
I know. I would love to. I would love to play again. Yeah. I don't know if you knew this, but the last time we played, when the pandemic hit, we were in the middle of a tour,
Yeah.
and our homecoming show was in New York at Mercury Lounge, and it got canceled, of course. So we had to drive straight home from Miami, and like the whole second half of the tour was canceled. So yeah, that would have been really, really fantastic, and I don't even know when it can happen again after that. But yeah, hopefully soon. I would love to. Love playing in New York, of course.
Love to have you here. But thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Toby, driver of KO Dot. Be sure to check out Moss Screw on the Swords and Plowshares Alike. This is Alex from Heavy New York. We will see you next time.
Thank you.